Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello people, coming to you from London, UK and out to the universe. I'm Paul Obertelli and this is edition 43 of THA Talks, brought to you by Theo Humanist Arts. Here at THA Talks we bring you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our sticky mitts on. Just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to get hold of us and send us in your thoughts or ideas for the show, maybe a request for a potential guest, you can do so by emailing info@thatalks.com. That's info@thatalks.com. Also, if you're digging what we're doing here, which we hope you are, you can subscribe using our RSS feed or through various podcast directories like iTunes or Stitcher. You can visit our website for more details on that. Joining me here today, as usual, from the other side of London, a surge from a dramaturge, David Barry.
I told the witch doctor I was in love with you. I told the witch doctor you didn't love me true. He say ooh, ah, ting, trang, walla walla bing bang. Good evening, Mr. Obertelli, how are you?
Was that Mary Poppins?
Absolutely no.
Had a bit of a Poppins vibe to it.
Oh, did it? I love Mary Poppins. What lovely family films they were. Not always a terrible phrase to use about a film. No, a song that goes back, I believe, to the 30s, a bit of fun, maracas, black magic, and so on. Dare one say something like a shaman?
Oh, that sounds spookily interesting.
Spookily and rather to the point, bearing in mind today's guest.
Do you know who our guest is today, David?
I believe it is that there intriguing person, Jonathan Zap.
Indeed, an author, philosopher, journalist, and a teacher who's written extensively on psychology and contemporary mythology. He has worked as a staff gemologist and an instructor for the Gemological Institute of America.
Well, I mean, we both seem to have a complete obsession with the work of Carl Gustav Jung. And he really strikes me as a shaman, Paul. You know, a man of magic, a man of power, a man of knowledge. I mean, he's even a paranormal researcher, isn't he?
Yeah, it's going to be a deep conversation, I think. We're covering a lot of areas because he's quite into his research and spirituality. So let's get to it, eh?
I can barely wait.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you've got a great website and lots of interesting information. Maybe we could start off by letting our listeners know what the Zap Oracle is and how it came about, and giving us a bit of a synopsis of it all.
Okay, well, I guess there are two answers. One is, of course, the zaporacle.com website, which has thousands of pages of writings. The other answer is that the Zap Oracle is an oracle that bears my last name, Zap. That's the name I was born with. And that's an oracle I've been working on for over 30 years. It's got 664 cards. It's a free online oracle. A free membership saves your readings indefinitely. And people can go to zaporacle.com to check that out.
Cool. That sounds really good. Yeah, I mean, it's a great website. It looks like you're covering so much areas. So we're going to kind of roll with it here. And maybe to start off with something to focus on is the book Crossing the Event Horizon, Human Metamorphosis and the Singularity Archetype. That sounds really cool. So let's get stuck into that. What inspired that book, and let us know about that.
Well, what inspired it was anomalous experiences that happened to me in the 1970s. And I follow a sort of path of creativity and discovery that I recommend. It's also a document and a podcast on my website called The Path of the Numinous. And numen means spirit, so something's numinous when it lights up as having an uncanny significance. And so if you follow the path of the numinous, you just follow that numinous object down the rabbit hole to see where it where it goes. And I started doing that on a more formal basis when I was 19 and a junior in college and doing some independent research. And then in my last year of college, the next year, I decided to take on another challenge, some numinous things that I had no clue how to pursue, but I'd had a number of paranormal experiences and also some very intense numinous experiences with science fiction movies and novels that were kind of inexplicable. One of them was a British science fiction movie called Village of the Damned, 1960. And I saw that when I was 12 or 13, and I'd seen many other science fiction movies, but this one struck me like a religious vision. It would just seem to move something deep inside. It seemed to relate to the core of what was going on in my life or life in general in some way. And it wasn't clear why it was so stirred something so deep. And I had a similar experience as maybe a sophomore at the Bronx High School of Science when I was maybe 14 years old or so, reading Arthur C. Clarke's classic science fiction novel Childhood's End, where I thought were some of my most original ideas. Here they were in this book that was published 4 years before I was born. How could such a thing be possible? And so then in my last year of college, when I was 20 years old, 1978, I decided to set out to find out for a philosophy honors paper called Archetypes of a New Evolution, which is still on my website. And it was my mom, who was a psychologist for 44 years, who gave me my first hint. She said, well, you should look into this guy, Carl Jung, and his theory of the archetypes and the collective unconscious. So I went up to the second floor of the school library, and there's those elegant black Princeton Bowlingen edition collected works of Jung. And as impressive as they look, I'm also looking at them a little bit skeptically, and I'm thinking, like, what is this dead Swiss guy who reached manhood in the 19th century going to tell me, this weird Jewish kid from the Bronx, about my sci-fi obsessions? But I figured I'll give it a shot. I pull out the index volume, and I see, oh, wow, he wrote a book called Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen from the sky. Well, that was a direct hit because both Childhood's End and Village of the Damned both start with flying saucers. I start flipping through that book and I see, wow, he was writing about this subject and looking into ufology right near the end of his life. And it was like he couldn't let go of the subject because at the end of he reaches the end of the book, there's an afterword, and after the afterword, there's an epilogue, and after the epilogue, there's a supplement. And the supplement is Jung's study of a science fiction novel called The Midwich Cuckoos. Well, that was the novel that the movie Village of the Damned was based on.
Okay.
So it was almost as if in my first encounter with Jung, he were like a holographic wizard bearing a torch, stepping out of the bookcase to say, like, yeah, I was looking at that one too, and here's what I thought, which had many parallels to my thinking on the subject. So his endpoint was my starting point, and using all the tools of Jungian psychology, I was able to make some progress in recognizing that there was a new, well, not really a new, but an emergent archetype called the Singularity Archetype that relates to the twin event horizons of a breaking point in human evolution, what sometimes is called eschaton.
Yeah.
It could be either an extinction or a quantum evolutionary change. And on the personal time scale, death.
Right. The big one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the breaking point and stuff, I mean, you look at a lot of religions, and you've got the 2012 thing that the Mayans were passionate about, and then you've got the Christianity, the end days. You've got a lot of these religions, they've got kind of this, maybe this point that you're talking about. Does that have something to do with it? If we can sort of talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, there's an implicit or explicit eschatology, I guess, in many different belief systems. However, what tends to happen, though, because every archetype has a light side and a dark side, and one of the dark sides of the Singularity Archetype, and the way that it most commonly pathologizes, is into apocalypticism. And so apocalypticism has been around even before. I thought Zoroastrianism was the first. I recently read that it may have been around as long as into the Paleolithic.
Yeah.
And so this expectation that the world will end, seen in a very negative light, is basically the event horizon of the singularity archetype seen through the eyes of the ego, which is sort of the point of view of children of the damned, or village of the damned. But while, say, for example, Childhood's End sees the same event, this is a more complete vision. And many visions of the singularity archetype, I can give some examples of dreams that illustrate this, will have a dual vision. From the point of view of the ego, it seems apocalyptic, but from the point of view of what Jung called the self, the totality of psychic structures, or a more cosmic point of view, the same event is revealed to be a quantum evolutionary change. Just as death can seem like an emergency to the ego, but an emergence to the self.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, you look at the world today, it just seems an ego fest. I mean, on every levels, it's just so much energy out there with people's egos and wars and so on. So yeah, it certainly feels like those times are upon us. What were your views on the Mayan take of it? You know, the whole end of because Hollywood obviously blew that out of proportion and made that out to be a negative thing, as you say. Do you think that we're moving into another era, and this is basically the chaos before, like a more harmonious, better time, where we're a slightly more mature and evolved species, so to say?
Well, it always feels like the end times, and it's felt like that. We can go through the whole comic list of end time prophecies, which I have in my book. And other people have drawn up. I mean, there's an Assyrian clay tablet where they're talking about the end of the world and how the new generation is totally corrupt and things are speedily coming to the end. And that was like written 4000 BC. And so it always seems like this must be the end times, because that's always correct to a certain extent, but it has to do with that confusion that human beings have between inner and outer. It's always the end time for any individual mortal human, because the parallel event horizon of personal death, the life cycle of the individual and the life cycle of the species, it's like a fractal or a hologram where the small part recapitulates the whole. They parallel, and the species understandably always has a limited lifespan too. The average for all species is 100,000 years. From 1 million species, it's 1 million years. And we're working to lower the average, of course, right now with environmental destruction. But so it will always feel like end times, and there's been no other human enterprise that I can think of that's been popular for thousands of years that has a 100% failure rate like end time prophecy does. And so let's get to the Mayan thing now. So what we saw with 2012, and you may know one of my close friends is John Major Jenkins, who's the most reliable person on that subject, and his work was commonly misinterpreted. The Maya had no apocalyptic thoughts that we've ever found about 2012. According to and the Mayan calendar didn't end in 2012. So just to get rid of a couple of the most common misconceptions, like all calendars is perpetual, the odometer just flips over and a whole new cycle begins. And they also, when people say Mayan prophecy, well, we've never found a single sentence of Mayan prophecy about 2012. There were indications based on how the date was used on a couple of inscriptions that they saw it as a significant date. But the closest we could get to Mayan prophecy would be the Popol Vuh, a document a few hundred years old that shows what they thought about cycle endings and so forth. And they would see it as a time of renewal, a movement from the darkness of the Iron Age into the dawn of a new Gold Age. But what happened was apocalypticism is such a active complex in the human psyche, because it's the dark side of the singularity archetype, and a way to displace personal anxiety about death, that people with a lot of apocalypticism in their ancestry, many of them Christians, even though they would deny being Christian, and might be more New Age currently or whatever, decided to, or didn't decide, or unconsciously projected their apocalypticism onto the unsuspecting artifact of another culture. And if there's a significant date, it must be an end time date. And there was all this nonsense said about it. And I wrote about that before 2012 in a document and podcast on my website called Carnival 2012, a psychological study of the 22 pitfalls and blind spots of esoteric research. And what happens, I think, is that people have a sense of the imminence of their own personal death, which is imminent for all of us. And so this is a great lowest common denominator factor that's as universal, if not more so, than sex. And so you have a very powerful, ubiquitous force that wants someplace to go, that for the ego-bound person will be felt as very anxious. And now what it can do is it can transfer or displace that anxiety onto the idea of a collective end, which relieves anxiety in a number of different ways. Well, first, there's a confusion of inner and outer, because you get to displace your sense that that we're in end times. This could all end at any moment. Always a true statement. Onto a collective event, because one of the things that the ego is most invested in is its place in the social hierarchy. So one of the irritating and anxious thoughts about death is facing it alone, where the idea is that the social matrix will continue without you. Your status will drop to zero, perhaps, and other people will be able to keep going on and hitting on each other and doing all kinds of things, use your stuff and, take away your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and you won't even be there. But if everybody's checking out at once, then the social status freezes in place. In fact, you may elevate in it because you may be one of a chosen group that knows the special date. And then if we add to it something like a rapture, where the kind of people you like will be taken away to some divine realm, and the kind of people you don't like will be left to deal with the Antichrist, we have basically an all-satisfying scenario for the ego. And here's a little anecdotal example of how this works. Because one of the things, by the way, about an apocalyptic date, for it to be exciting, and it made 2012 popular for the last few years, its popularity, I think, peaked and then started plummeting downhill after the Roland Emmerich film came out, and then people just, that brand was already so dirtied and inflated that people just started walking away from it. And also, of course, some of the charlatans started to realize, oh, wow, I'm going to get Y2K'd. I better stop talking about it now that we're getting close. And a lot of them, I could out certain names, but a lot of people who couldn't, like they said, the former mayor of New York, every sentence had a subject, an object, and 9/11 in it. Well, there were some charlatans who every sentence had subject, object, and 2012 in it. Until we started getting a year or two before, and then they suddenly stopped talking about it because they didn't want to get Y2K'd, and which they did, of course. And it was a sexy date because it wasn't too far away. Then when it got too close, it stopped being sexy because people were afraid of being disconfirmed. Here's a date that I'll make a prophecy right now, as unsuccessful as prophecy usually is, that if we're still around in 2050 or so, you're going to see books coming out called with names like the Newton Code, because Sir Isaac Newton spent decades of his life, more time looking into esoteric matters and occult matters than physics. And he studied the book of Revelation inside and out, trying to figure out an end date. He came up with 2060. Well, nobody talks about that date because it's not a sexy end date, because nobody wants to wait 40 some odd years for the end date, because that may be out past their expected lifespan. So that's not a sexy date yet. It will be in the future. And there was a woman in the 1967, I think it was, or maybe 69, Elizabeth Steen. She started predicting that California was going to have an apocalyptic earthquake. I think the date she picked was something like August 14th of 1969. And now all these copycat psychics around the world started picking up this date. There were actually, it was bigger than 2012 at the time. In fact, there were several New York Times articles about this because so many people believed it and were talking about it. And it felt like it was the information was coming from everywhere because other people picked it up, but it really just originated with this one woman, Elizabeth Steen. And then at a very young age, like 29, a few days before the earthquake didn't happen, she died of usually not fatal symptoms of a relatively rare disease. So it was sort of true for her, but not generally. But she was sincere. She moved her family out of the Bay Area and to Spokane, Washington at great expense. So this is what happens and it will happen again. Right now, apocalypticism is at a real low point because there have been such big, high-profile disconfirmations, beginning with the year 2000. Which was amazingly anticlimactic. Like, it's almost like not one computer failed anywhere, it seemed.
I remember that, yeah.
And then we went through Harold Camping's End Date, where everybody was already laughing at that in advance. And of course, 2012 was another mouse that roared type of scenario where nothing happened. And so right now, apocalypticism is a bit of a radioactive tar baby that nobody wants to touch at the moment because it's been so recently sullied. But it will be coming back. And of course, it is true that, like, right now we can claim that there are more weird variables at play than at any earlier time in human history. However, despite all the apocalyptic talk, we also have some of the lowest rates of violence in thousands of years. Not in total numbers, but as a proportion of the population, the lowest per capita war death rate. This country, and probably England as well, have the lowest homicide rates since they've measured those. I mean, remember, even in 19th century England, people were still going to public hangings as a sort of family recreation. And, people were being waylaid by highway robbers and so forth. So people are always talking about how bad things are. And actually, in a lot of ways, they've never been better, even though we've got lots of problems.
It's almost like our perception is just getting more. We're getting more fragile to stuff like that. So it seems like more, which means maybe that's signs of we are evolving as a race. That you look at boxing now. Although there's that mixed martial arts, which gets pretty nasty as well, but it's even there's people who look at boxing and they think, oh, that's a horrible sport, and like you say, years back they were killing each other in Rome and so on. Do you think? I mean, it sort of relates to the question I was going to ask. Is another thing with all this 2012 like stories out there, and a lot of it is well researched, like you've pointed out, and a lot of it is just people getting carried away with themselves. But there was also a lot of talk of our DNA changing, that there may be the signs of our DNA changing and we're changing physically. Have you come across decent research for that or experiences that support that idea?
I haven't come across the decent research. My guess is that it's probably not there. It's the sort of urban legend kind of thing of like, now we have triple strand DNA. I mean, if anything is remarkable, it's that these changes, I think there are changes going on in human beings that are quite profound, but I think they're more exogenetic, if that's the right term, that they're or extragenetic might be better, because I don't think the human form in a way that would show up in an autopsy or full body scans or DNA analysis has changed all that much. I don't think that there are new and improved models that are better than the best people of the Renaissance and that kind of thing. I think that the changes are I think it's the materialists who expect that DNA must lead the way. And Rupert Sheldrake from your country, who's one of our great pioneers as a scientist, showing flaws in science. In his most recent book, Science Set Free, has a chapter called DNA is overrated. We've been looking to it as having, an answer for everything. And every other day you're seeing a newspaper article, we've discovered the gene that causes people to fall in love, and all this kind of reductive kind of nonsense. And so right now, DNA is thought to hold the secrets to everything, but I agree with Rupert Sheldrake that the information is probably more in a non-local field, and Bruce Lipton and others have suggested DNA may be more like a transceiver. It may have more of an antenna-like aspect, and that it's the materialist idea that's still kind of looking for the computer inside. Well, this must be the software that everything is based on. Because right now we're a lot of materialists are still seeing human beings as kind of like a wetware version of a computer, and therefore this must be the software, and so that's at the core of everything. I'm not saying DNA isn't important, but I don't know that DNA is the thing that is going to change first.
I saw something interesting the other day regarding DNA. That they reckon Jack the Ripper, right?
Sure,
Jack,
right.
I didn't know how popular he was over that side of the pond, but he's they reckon that they managed to get a DNA sample from one of the death scenes, and they think that they've actually managed to produce an image of what he looked like through DNA, and they think that they've managed to crack that case. So that, I mean, it can be interesting in that sort of aspect. But
right, it's supposed to be some Polish immigrant or something.
That's
like
right.
that.
That's correct. Yeah. I sense David's itching to get stuck into this one. Just say, Jonathan, if you could pull sort of half an inch away from your mic, because I'm getting a little bit of pop, on your mic there.
Sure.
David, what are you making of all this?
DNA, schmna, whatever. Childhood's End. What a wonderful novel that was. I remember reading it years ago. The Rapture. That's an American thing, isn't it? No time for it myself. You're an intriguing man, Jonathan Zap.
Thank you.
I was looking at your work as a wilderness guide, of all things. I sometimes take international students around London, but you do such a great amount of genuinely good work. That's caught my attention. You're a very, very fine man. We also share an obsession with Carl Jung. I also am semi-obsessed with Roberto Assagioli, psychosynthesis and all that sort of thing. Mythology. I think Europeans tend to use that word with a capital M, an uppercase M, whereas Americans tend to use it with a lowercase m. We tend to mean a sacred story, a story which is collective, therefore it has meaning for everyone. I have noticed that with love and respect, our cousins, our brothers, our sisters across the pond tend to mean an incredible story, which of course is not the same thing. What do you think of that, Jonathan?
Well, obviously, I'm on the capital M side of things as a Jungian, and I think that it's an example of the superficial materialism and consumer culture of America that does tend to denigrate deeper things. And one of the things that Jung observed in his few trips to America was the extroverted bias of this society. And so if you're an extrovert, then, this is just a bunch of, nonsense and so forth. But of course, this type of dismissive, reductive materialist is not only in America. For example, in Charles Dickens, a British author, of course, in his book Hard Times, I think it was Hard Times, one of his, I think it was a later novel, there is a character named Gradgrind, who's an industrialist. And he has a little girl that's his daughter, or he's responsible for in some way, and he is such a nose to the grindstone materialist that, like, he objects to her having wallpaper that has horses as part of the design, and says, like, quadrupeds don't walk on walls, and and then this is too fanciful and mythological for him. And so you can have you have these sorts of people everywhere, and Jung talked about most of his experience was European people who thought that, like, if something just happens in your mind, that's just a bit of nonsense, just flickers through your mind or your imagination. But Jung pointed out that no, it has a factual existence and it means something. And so Arnold Toynbee, another Englishman, I believe, a great historian who studied the life cycle of civilizations, wanted to figure out, well, what causes a civilization to decline? And he came to realize it was when it no longer had a ruling mythology. Mythology is, if we are going to reductively compare human beings to computers and so forth, which I don't recommend. I mean, that's like the most fundamental operating system or source code. And just like as I said before, the species and the individual, their life cycles parallel. I think what is most likely to trigger the decline of an individual is they're not having a ruling, healthy mythology. And so I try and encourage people to have, more meaningful mythologies and to really examine their mythologies. Because people have them, even the people who dismiss mythology, they just don't know what they are. But sometimes it'll show up on a bumper sticker. Like I remember in the 80s commuting to work, and I would see cars with bumper stickers that read, I owe, so off to work I go. And that's kind of like the evil spell at the core of their lives. And instead of like questioning that, they actually put it as a bumper sticker on their car. And so other examples are life sucks and then you die. He who dies with the most toys wins. These are all mythologies. In fact, there was a complete mythology that used to show up in this country in ads for Schlitz beer that appeared on television when I was growing up in the 1960s and early 70s. And what you would see is some kind of like totally self-satisfied white guy, middle-aged guy with like a yachtsman's outfit, on his yacht. And he has like, a couple of blonde buxom babes on, he's got his arm around two of them. And he's got his can of Schlitz beer, of course, to show he's a real success. And the voiceover of the ad is, you only go around once in this world, so you better grab for all the gusto while you can. So that's a complete mythology. It says, first of all, there's no reincarnation, right? You only go around once. And so what should you do given this grim existential idea that you only have one lifetime? Well, just be a greedy hedonist and grab for all the gusto while you can. So everybody has a mythology, but it's often toxic. When I was teaching in the South Bronx and was in charge of the security for a school, there was a particularly dangerous kid who I had to ask one time to leave the hallway. And he said, I ain't got to do nothing but die. And I realized that was his mythology. And I had a close relative tell me recently, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in the devil, and I've been cursed since the day I was born. Wow. So these examples of people often in a single sentence give you their life mythology. And the thing is that a lot of life mythologies are unhealthy, but everybody's got one. And if you don't know what it is and it's not healthy, you're in big trouble.
Jonathan, incredible. Let me interject there, because I wasn't saying that in an accusatory way. Just linguistic tendencies. And the idea was, I think you have something much more developed over there, like urban myths. And I wondered if you felt it was tied in with that in any way.
Well, I think Jung recognized a danger in Western civilization. He talked about it being near the end of his life, that there was this tabula rasa. He recognized that the ruling mythology of Christianity was, been in decline for centuries practically. And that there was a kind of spiritual vacuum, and that's where he felt that the projecting divine things onto flying saucers was coming from, for example. Though he also thought they were physically real and might have another origin as well as being projection screens. And so what we have, just like we had in the Weimar Republic in pre-war Germany, an era that Jung worked in as a psychoanalyst and saw disturbances in the collective unconscious, is you have a lack of a ruling mythology, and therefore all kinds of other sorts of mythology become fads or come to possess people. Like when Jung was working in the Weimar Republic as a psychoanalyst, he noticed that a lot of his educated German patients were dreaming about Wotan, a Germanic god of war and mayhem. He called it Wotanism. It was such a phenomenon. And so basically, in a mythological vacuum, people become very vulnerable to all sorts of ersatz occultism, to all kinds of crazy beliefs, and in the Weimar Republic, hollow earth theories and all kinds of other things, many of which inspired the Nazis. Some of the hollow earth theories of and an occult novel from the 19th century called it's in my book, but I can't think of the name, like The Coming Age or something.
The Coming Race.
Coming Race, exactly. Edward Bulwer Lytton, was that the author?
Yeah.
The Vril. I mean, they were inspired by a lot of they believed it to be literally true, because if you lack any kind of healthy mythology, then you can become quickly possessed by mythological elements that show up and turn into urban legends or like 2012 is a perfect example.
This is absolutely fascinating material. Would you say that Jungianism is your central focus, sort of your central paradigm? I'll tell you what's behind that. I'm a great admirer of Marion Woodman. And her background isn't sort of straight-laced psychotherapy either, but she became a very brilliant Jungian analyst, of course. And one of her thoughts that was, we moderns tend to spend most of our lives running away from the deeper resources within ourselves, deeper realities, deeper meanings. You strike me as sort of working on a parallel line to her, Jonathan. What do you think of that? Have you heard of her?
I've heard of her. I maybe read one of her books, and she seemed wonderful. Jung is certainly one of my most core paradigms. It's not my only one, and I certainly try not to be any kind of orthodox Jungian. And Jung himself said, "I'm glad I'm Jung and not a Jungian," because he saw the danger of anybody turning his psychology into any sort of orthodoxy or fundamentalist belief. Another one of my core paradigms is a philosophy I created called dynamic paradoxicalism. But I do think that Jung, more than any other single figure, gave me a real working paradigm for understanding many things in life, and it's never shown any signs of obsolescence, at least for me. I might have drifted away from your question. I can't remember if it was more about Marion Woodman or more about finding a deeper connection to life.
Well, we're interviewing you, not her, and sort of, there's a parallel, certainly. So let me, if my question was a little tangential, let me aim it back at you. Okay. What are these other resources that you draw on? I mean, your work is eclectic. There's a real brilliance to it, in my view. And, it covers so many fascinating areas. You've got me captivated, Jonathan. Let me add something before you answer. Would you see your primary work based on those ideas as something like a life coach or an involved scholar or even a shaman?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a shaman for the same reason that Terence McKenna didn't call himself one, which is that the tradition of that word is somebody whose primary relation is as a healer, as somebody that's able to do this kind of soul rescue thing. And I don't make that claim for myself. I would call myself a generalist. And that was something that Jung also considered himself, someone that he decried the modern era of the expert, of somebody who is like in the academic world where you're encouraged to know more and more about less and less until you know almost everything about almost nothing. So I just sort of go various places where the creative muse leads me, and I take a multidisciplinary generalist approach to that. So I've never been too sure what to call myself. I sometimes say mostly a writer, but I know that the creative muse could shift, and writing is just a medium. I go various places with it. For the last year, I've been mostly working on a fantasy fiction epic that I've been obsessed with writing since the same year that I discovered the Singularity Archetype in 1978. So I'm not sure what title to give myself, if any, that would have any real definition to it.
The one thing that surprises me about your work, you have a theme running through it called accepting mortality, or sort of almost an existential view of mortality. But you've also, that's balanced against actual experiences of the numinous, actual experiences of spirit. Do you see nothing beyond physical death? And, what you said a moment ago about the death of the species, I mean, certainly from a classical occult angle, all human beings, of course, are simply facets of one greater being, and that greater being would be built for eternity. That just struck me as something that I wasn't expecting when I was doing some research for this show. Have you any comments on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, death is one of my favorite subjects. I sort of take an existential warrior stance toward this life, but at the same time, I believe that there is a lot going on after death, and one of the subjects I research the most and am most interested in, and it's a major chapter in my book, is near-death experience, because we have, I believe at this point, basically incontrovertible evidence of the survival of consciousness past the body. And so I've had some personal experiences that are a bit like near-death experiences, because near-death experiences are one of the most profound ways in which people may encounter the singularity archetype. But the evidence is so substantial at this point, like the Pam Reynolds case I review in the book, and other cases that simply cannot be explained without realizing that the position that is most commonly held in the modern world and at most colleges and universities in this country and in Europe, where there's a lot of militant atheism in the academic world. I mean, if you think about some of our best known atheists, of course, are English. We don't need to name them, but and I'm not a theist myself, but there's an aggressive reductionism and anti-spirituality point of view that's seen as the only correct and sophisticated point of view. And one of its unquestioned absolute tenets is neurological materialism, the belief that consciousness, if it's admitted that consciousness exists at all, because many people who fall into this vein do not admit that, like the philosopher William Dennett with his identity theory or whatever. They believe consciousness is just an illusion. To the extent that any sort of consciousness exists at all, it's assumed to just be an epiphenomenon or a secondary effect of biochemical process in the brain. And this is what is called neurological materialism. Well, that position has been incontrovertibly defeated by a number of findings. People having near-death experiences where their eyes are taped shut, where, like with Pamela Reynolds, where she has no blood in her brain, where there is no electrical activity in her brain as measured by a state-of-the-art medical monitoring. There are like 37 people working on her. She had 2 EKG systems monitoring electrical activity in her brain, eyes taped shut, 100 decibel clicking earbuds in her ears to see if they can get, it's called an auditory evoked potential test, to see if they can get any reaction off her brainstem. It's a whole long, I can go through the whole case history, but, she comes back and is able to report on what exotic equipment in the surgery theater looked like the Midas Rex bone saw, that it looked more like an electric toothbrush than a saw. She's able to report on unusual things that people said and what music was playing in the background. All of this is completely impossible from the point of view of neurological materialism. And some of the best work, people are going to read even just one book on the subject and they want the most scientifically respectable one, I would recommend Consciousness Beyond Life by Dr. Pim van Lommel, Dutch cardiologist. His work was so respectable, it was published by the journal Lancet, a very conservative medical journal. And the evidence is just extremely strong for survival. And we've never had more of it because resuscitation technology has exploded even just in the last few years. We're bringing back people now who've been dead for 4 hours. And now they're saying that, if the Titanic happened today, they could just send a boat out, scoop up all these half-frozen people, and revive most of them. And so we're getting more near-death experience than was ever possible in any other era of human history, and we're able to observe people with all kinds of scientific tools we didn't have to show that. And you'll hear people who've not done their homework say dismissive things like, oh, well, this is just an oxygen-starved brain. Well, they do research by proclamation. They explain away the uninvestigated rather than doing what science is supposed to do, of investigate the unexplained. And an oxygen-starved brain doesn't form complex memories and doesn't create these incredible life-changing visions. It's just a completely impaired brain. So they come up with these reductive explanations that don't begin to account for things like the expected death experience, where somebody starts having a complete near-death experience because they're in a plane that appears like it's going to crash, but then the plane pulls out. And so they were never in medical jeopardy, but they thought they were, and they had a complex near-death experience. Or people who have near-death experiences who are congenitally blind since birth, and they have a visually comprehended experience. You can read about this in a book called Mindsight. The main co-author is Dr. Kenneth Ring, Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Connecticut. And so I not only believe, it's more than a belief, I mean, it's really the most reasonable conclusion by any principle of logic, like Occam's razor. Raymond Moody, who broke open this field in 1975 with his book Life After Life, which was purely anecdotal, but created such terms as near-death experience and life review. He never said that it proved anything, but that was because not only was he a psychiatrist trained in science, but he was also a professor of logic and Greek philosophy. And from the point of view of philosophical precision in which he was steeped in, we can't even prove that we're alive now from that perspective. But now even he says that we should say that it's been proved, because the alternate explanations would have to involve such extravagant violations of Occam's razor, like that, that the devil is fooling us into believing that people have had near-death experiences. That is really the only reasonable conclusion. And he came to that change of mind after doing the work of his most recent book that's about the shared death experience, where people in the same room as somebody having a near-death experience, and these people are not in any medical jeopardy, they have no oxygen-starved brain, will vicariously experience the near-death experience and a life review with the person who's dying, sometimes learning things about their life that they never knew as they go through the review with them. And so the near-death experience, everything that the Singularity Archetype, we haven't really gotten into this, predicts for the future evolutionary metamorphosis of the species, is an actuality in near-death experience. Things like a telepathic network and visual communication and a transcendence of ego and of linear time. Well, these all happen every single day for many near-death experiencers.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, naive realism is getting away with metaphorical murder. I know there are severe limitations to the way the word shaman can be used, but my dear friend, you are close to a Western version of it. You really are. Young Paul.
Yeah, there's really interesting. I think it was particularly interesting when we talk about the reincarnation side of it, because I think that if it suddenly became a scientific fact that we reincarnated and stuff, it would completely change the world, because as you pointed out, how selfish people can be, that when you think, well, this is it, I've only got one life, you may as well go out and grab what you can, and it's got that very self-centered ego-based thing. Whereas if people, which I personally do believe that I've reincarnated into other lives, and I do take that into account in my life, certain things, and it's a good way of dealing with stress as well, because you don't feel you have to cram every issue that you've got into this. Just think, well, just go with it, so to speak. So that's really interesting. Have you ever experimented with any sort of hallucinogenic drugs or anything like that have affected you at all?
Yes, is the general answer, and some of that has been life-changing. But what I tend to find, I'm not a person who gets on the bandwagon so much as, say, like my late colleague Terence McKenna, mostly because I have to summon my courage, and I usually get slammed by these things. I don't always find that the experience has this guided content or some being coming forward to guide me through it, as some people have said. But my ayahuasca experiences have been very minimal, and my hopes are for that substance, because most other major hallucinogens tend to just kind of make me feel like I'm poisoned, and I may benefit from it, but more in the way of an ordeal poison, where it feels like some sort of feels like emphasis on feel, like some kind of brush with death, and so therefore I can be kind of strengthened by feeling like I've survived it. But the other side of that is that I get those kind of visionary experiences that do feel guided and do feel intelligently directed most mornings when I wake up pre-dawn to have a pre-dawn writing session, and I'm usually not doing anything stronger than like yerba mate or coffee or something like that. However, the one substance that really does help me the most, or on a more frequent basis, and it's legal from where I'm sitting here in Boulder, Colorado, is marijuana, but it helps me because I use it sparingly. So in other words, if I do it once every few days, meanwhile I'm like exercising and I'm eating right and I'm sleeping right, and then I get up for some particular early morning writing session and I do a small, what would be a vanishingly small amount to a chronic stoner type, like a 10 milligram edible dose, in the form of a gummy bear or something like that, or maybe 2 or 3 vapor hits. That can really boost my intuition up significantly and give me some kind of breakthrough writing session. In the last few months, though, my writing has been, the access to it has been so open that I've often found that didn't even help that much. But that's the substance that has most likely worked for me in giving me access to stuff that I already have some access to. And the stronger stuff has mostly been dark experiences for me. I'm looking forward to getting that like wonderful guided, plant as ally entity kind of experience, but I'm still waiting for that.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of Terence McKenna and a few other similar types of researchers and philosophers, they have these experiences, and it does have a lot of impact on them. I find tied in with that, there seems to be a lot of UFO talk and stuff. I mean, I know you get the conspiracy theories where sometimes they go a bit too far and it all gets a little bit like spaghetti thinking. But what are your views on the alien and UFO thing? Do you find that's kind of like an astral interdimensional thing? Is it a load of rubbish, or have you had any experience yourself with it?
Well, it is a chapter of my book. I've been fascinated with ufology since I was a preteen and have been studying it all that time. And I have a tremendous amount of stuff to say about it. I don't think that my point of view or any valid point of view at this point can be reduced to it's nothing but conspiracy, or that it's nothing but extraterrestrials. That's the conventional view that people have, is that it must be extraterrestrial. But there's a lot of stuff that points toward, some people use like infraterrestrial or something like that, that these seem to be entities that are very wrapped up with the human species. One valid thing that you could say about them that some scientist once said to Jacques Vallée, the great French astronomer whose books on ufology are the best I've ever read, as he called them, he said, the one valid phrase you could say about them is that they are reality transformers. If you're out there looking as a materialist, thinking these are nuts and bolts spacecraft and this kind of thing, you may be viewing them naively because these are objects that don't seem to obey the laws of Newtonian physics. They turn at right angles that would, turn any organic body into raspberry puree or something like that. They may change shape or merge with each other. So they seem to obey more like the physics of the dream time. And it seems that the forms in which the visitors appear may be interactive with our psychic needs, so that what in the Celtic past might have been seen as elves and fairies might now be seen as gray aliens with proctological tendencies who are coming from an extraterrestrial world with like our familiar motivations of imperialist conquest or scientific investigation. But as Jacques Vallée points out, and some of his writings on the holes in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that most of the motives given to them, like genetic manipulation, would make them very inefficient scientists, because with all the visits and so forth, they should have already been able to do what they need to do and gone on to other things. But one of the leading explanations for a lot of the phenomena, I don't think it may come down to one thing. I think it's a phenomenon that may have many different aspects or many different valid explanations. But when Terence McKenna showed pictures of gray aliens to Amazonian shamans, they said, oh, the ancestors. So one real possibility is that what we're calling the visitors may be dead people, who are maybe in a shape-shifting form. And there is a lot to suggest this, like in the Communion Letters, and Whitley Strieber and Ann Strieber have spoken and written a lot about this. There are a lot of experiencers who found a lot of dead people overlaps, like a woman's mother comes back to her in some kind of dream, and she appears as a gray alien. I had a dream where there was this kind of overlap between a dead person and a gray alien, so-called. And by the principle of Occam's razor, which I don't think works in all cases, but that, hypotheses should not be multiplied without necessity. If we wanted a source of hominid, intelligent beings who look a lot like us and who are very interested in us, well, how about us as the source? Because we only seem to... We don't want to fall into those materialists who don't believe in reincarnation and don't believe in other lives, who think that the human life cycle is contained just between birth and death. What if these are shape-shifting creatures that are part of the life cycle, the after-death life cycle, where the physics of dreams have taken over and we've become shape-shifting idioplastic entities that can appear in many different forms, for various reasons of psychology and mythology, because really that's what they seem most interested in doing, is manipulating the human psyche. They're not making big physical changes that we've been able to detect, despite rumors of triple-strand DNA and stuff like that. But they have been changing the human psyche in all kinds of ways, if only through inexplicability, because like a Zen koan, having a phenomenon that is logically inexplicable can be a way of breaking us out of our naive materialism, among many other possible motives. So it's a vast and fascinating subject. And the only thing I'll say to suggest to people who want to go further into it is that the more certainty that somebody has who's speaking on the subject, and the more they claim to know, like the people who can tell you the names of everybody on the Palladian High Council, probably the less they actually know. And the more intelligent observers, like a Whitley Strieber or Jacques Vallée, will more wisely refrain from making absolute conclusions, and will admit, not knowing past a certain point what this is all about.
So, certainly a massive mystery that, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. We are getting pressed for time now. David, do you want to throw something in quickly before we start to wrap it up?
Oh, just something quickly. I mean, I felt physically out of sorts this evening, so I'm not at my best. I've enjoyed this no end. It's really picked me up. Jonathan, there is talk of energy, parasites, and vampires, of all things. Tell us more.
Okay, well, and you guys can give me feedback on time, because this is a subject as vast as ufology, but it's something that, just to put it on a more rational basis, and I don't claim to have any absolute knowledge or to make any definitive pronouncements on the subject, but I just want to point out to people that it's possible to miss a whole domain or dimension of life, because there's precedent for that. Until a Dutch janitor, basically, A.V. Leeuwenhoek, in the 1600s, I believe, or maybe it was the 1700s, ground the first lenses fine enough to create the first microscope. Every culture, Western, Eastern, whatever, tribal, was basically completely clueless about the microbiological realm, a whole dimension of life. And if you were to tell somebody from the 1600s, the most educated Renaissance person you could find, that there's this whole fantastic cryptozoology of life forms out there of amazing variety, and that even more fantastic, they aren't just out there, they are in here, that you are a colony, that each human body is a colony, basically, or a network of, about 50 trillion of these creatures. I mean, that would be burnt at the stake type madness from their point of view. And yet that is the reality that we've just totally accept, because we've grown up with it. And there can be another domain or dimension of life that we may be totally missing, and yet it's one that only fundamentalist materialism or scientism, reductive materialism, which is not science, of course, misses, and that is a realm of energetic organisms, which every single culture has recognized. accept materialism, and they can be called spirits or whatever you want to call them, but these are organisms or life forms that are not bound to the carbon-based structure that we see in the micro and macro biological worlds. And what is observed when we discovered the microbiological world is we discovered the same classic patterns of energetic transaction. And three of those most classic patterns are parasitism, predation, and symbiosis. And parasitism, and that is also what people report about spirit entities. And all cultures recognized that there were parasitic spiritual entities, except materialism. And the parasites feeding off of the energy of something else, according to National Geographic, on the macro and microbiological plane, they outnumber all other kinds of species 4 or 5 to 1. That's how basic they are. There are some Oxford biologists who came up with the Red Queen hypothesis that basically states that that sexual reproduction, as compared to asexual reproduction, was an evolutionary byproduct of parasitism. It comes from Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen tells Alice, "You see here, my dear, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in one place." The idea is that the parasites were evolving and adapting so quickly that for hosts to stay ahead of them, they had to evolve sexual reproduction to have enough genetic novelty. And so all these different cultures talk about parasitic energetic organisms. Like the Christians, there were the incubi and the succubi. And the Buddhists talk about the pretas or the hungry ghosts. In Ayurveda, the traditional medicine of India, the study of disincarnate entities and their effects on human health was a branch of medicine that was seen as on par with gynecology. And in Chinese medicine, there are all these like hundreds of acupuncture points. There's something like 38 of them that have the prefix Kui in front of them. That means that these are energetic points that energetic parasites can feed off of. So this is a phenomenon that is reported by a great many people, including people who don't know any of this lore from other cultures. And any culture is in trouble when it denies a vast range of human testimony, like we used to deny, testimony about child abuse. We don't have to assume that the people experiencing it are interpreting it right, but this is a vast range of testimony, and I got much of it as my work as a dream interpreter, where people have these very stereotyped nocturnal attack experiences that seem to be devoid of psychological content, but resembled ones reported hundreds of years ago. And so I think that the effects that these organisms may have on us psychologically and physiologically is something worth looking into. The Gnostics believed that in a parasitic species manipulating the human race, they called the archons. Basically, the movie The Matrix was a sci-fi version of Gnosticism, consciously created as such. And they believed in documents that we found right at the end of World War II, a very interesting moment for these documents to turn up that are as old as the oldest books of the Christian Bible, the New Testament, where the Gnostics said that the archons would keep deceiving us so that religious ideologies would keep us forever at war with each other so they could harvest our negative emotions. And now, what are we talking about in the news this week but ISIS and people being beheaded and all this over-the-top, incredibly sadistic and illogical behavior being done by religious extremists who commit suicide in the process and so forth, and do all these strange things that are hard to explain rationally. Like one Islamic imam said, may have had some association with Al-Qaeda after 9/11, that how the West would misunderstand them, that you see our young men are just as passionate about death as your young men are about life. So there seems to be a strange death force and an X factor in the over-the-topness of human evil that we see in things like serial killers or in the Nazis that seems hard to explain using conventional psychology. And
Jonathan,
so I wonder, we're probably over the time. So that's a little rundown on the mind parasite theme.
No, that's great.
Jonathan, well, you must come back on the show as soon as we can arrange it. What do you think, Paul? I mean, this is a whole other subject. It's absolutely fascinating. What do you think?
Yeah, we have a habit of getting very interesting people on the show and finding out that an hour is not enough. So it would be fantastic if sometime, if your schedule permits in the future, we can come back and continue this chat, because there's so much interesting stuff here. I'm sure our listeners are really enjoying it. So yeah,
I'll be happy to. I'm kind of an Anglophile, so talking to people with British accents is entertainment enough, even despite the fascinating and incisive questions.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll have to do it again. And do you want to just let our listeners know where they can see what you're up to, and anything you want to promote, let them know about? Okay,
my website is Zap Oracle, spelled the way it sounds, ZapOracle.com. They can friend me on Facebook as Zap Oracle or Jonathan Zap. And my book is Crossing the Event Horizon, Human Metamorphosis, and the Singularity Archetype. And I've also got many podcasts, so they can listen to my work on my iPhone or Android app called Zap Steamcast.
That's excellent. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
That was Jonathan Zap.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, he's tying in, to my mind, experimental and rather classically received psychotherapy with the esoteric. What a remarkable thing to be doing.
Well, I just like chatting with people that actually think, and you can tell he's a thinker and thinking about life, and that it's, life's interesting, so why not think about it?
Paul, he's a thinker, he's a researcher. He's quite a gifted writer. He has a good turn of phrase. Now, you know how uppity I get about that sort of thing. Yeah. More power to him, 100%.
We will definitely be looking forward to getting him back on, which we will do. One thing I'd like to do is thank all our listeners and give a bit of a rundown. I haven't done this for a while, so I'll give a bit of a rundown of the types of people listening to the show all around. It's quite impressive. The spectrum of the internet is a fantastic thing. I'm going to give you a rundown. We've got United States, United Kingdom, obviously, and Brazil, Canada, Australia, Ireland, Finland, Norway, Germany, Netherlands, Turkey, Thailand, India, Belgium, Spain, South Africa, Sweden, France, New Zealand, Azerbaijan, Kenya, Philippines, Japan, Denmark, Singapore, Romania, Hong Kong, Hungary, Italy, Indonesia, Israel, Portugal, Uganda, Ukraine, Mexico, Poland, Croatia, Serbia, Austria, Argentina, Belgium, Slovenia, Colombia, Czech Republic, Puerto Rico, Egypt, Iceland, and Costa Rica.
And inside the moon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One thing that's we've got one that says anonymous proxy. So have we got some mysterious men in black checking out the show, do you think?
I'm sorry, I'm not a tech geek. What on earth does that mean?
Well, it means someone's hidden, that they've been checking our stuff out, and that we can't find out who they are. So another one we've got is other regions. So maybe someone on Mars or the moon is actually listening to this podcast, David.
Men in black, much more cool. Men in black.
Well, yeah, I would like to. Well, I don't know if I would like to meet one, but it would be like to see. It would be nice to see one. Ask for it.
Apparently, that's really strangely white.
Yeah, take a picture with them.
You've got these very. Oh God, wouldn't that be amazing? Like the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, thumbs up.
Thumbs up, Men in Black.
Yeah, and they'd be just probably quite straight faced, but anyway,
white with these wonderful black clothes. What a wonderful picture.
Anyway, right, coming up, we've got a return of Courtney Brown, who's going to come and talk about the 9/11 remote viewing project by Farsight. I'm really looking forward to seeing that, speaking with him about that, rather. Also, we've got professional hypnotherapist and counsellor Mary Rodwell, who will be joining us to talk about alien contact cases that she deals with. Again, that's going to be a mouthwaterer. And then after that, we'll be a bit further down the line, we'll have Darren Storer back, Anthony Peake, Mike Wolf, Prakash Adashra, and lots more currently being booked up. So we've got a brilliant schedule coming up. So do check back, people. And,
keep supporting us. We're doing this for the joy of trying to get ideas and discussion stimulated generally. We're not doing it for any other reason. But this is Paul's ingenious baby, and we enjoy doing it really very much indeed.
Yeah. And we have noticed a lot of you start linking the shows and stuff, and we do see it, and we really appreciate it. Anyone listening to your show for the first time, it's our content is all free. All we ask is that you just do us a little favour and tell your friends about it, spread the word, post it on your Facebook pages. Every little bit counts and stuff, because that's what we rely on to help spread the word about the show and motivate us to keep doing these shows for you. But I think that's a wrap, isn't it, David?
That's it for this evening, my dear. I am feeling a bit out of sorts. Maybe it's too much Polish plum cake earlier today. Who knows?
Well, you can go make yourself a cup of hot cocoa, put your feet up, and I don't know, sit and watch YouTube
bliss.
Or something.
Bliss. Absolute bliss.
Thanks again, folks, and we'll be speaking to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Chowsy, chowsy.